Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry, and today we're lucky enough to be joined by a remarkable guest, Simon Woodhead, who is founder and Group CEO at Simwood Group PLC. Hello, Simon. Welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Barry. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's all ours. So first of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. We know you're really busy, so we do appreciate that. But for those people who don't know you, could you just talk a little bit about who you are and the company that you work at?
Yeah, so I'm Simon. Simwood is my company. We're a telecommunications carrier. So we're a phone company's phone company in simple terms. We give other phone companies phone numbers, the ability to call far-flung places and lots of things around that. The business is 28 years old. I founded it in 1996, and at the time it was the world's first global gateway between the internet and mobile phones, which looked to me like they might catch on and converge. And our competitor at the time was a little company called Research in Motion, who had the stupid idea of making their own hardware, whereas we were using commodity mobile phones to give people principally an email service using SMS as the transport. So that's where we started. That followed a career of mine in finance. I skipped the whole university thing and managed to get a job as a graduate trainee within finance. Progressed through that. Did relatively well, I understand, but was pulled towards technology within the banks that I worked at, and began this business as an evening project when things calmed down in one of those roles, and it grew from there. Really, we got into voice or VoIP specifically right at the start, right around 2000, just as some of the key open source projects were getting going, and saw an opportunity and grew with it.
It's interesting because finance always seems to be one of the areas, banking, but specifically in the UK, but all these entrepreneurs seem to start off in finance. I wonder what it is about finance that kickstarts people into becoming an entrepreneur. What was it that you experienced that decided, maybe I want to start my own business?
I would go as far as say it was the other way around for me. So I was pretty enterprising as a child. I was pretty anti-establishment, anti-authority throughout my childhood, and had a number of experiences to reinforce that. So I think I was destined to work for myself, but having the experience of a big organization, the politics and the opportunity that goes with it was really quite useful and powerful for me. And from a technology point of view, having exposure to how other people before you have thought about solving problems is quite useful. And there's things from those times that still come into fore of mind when I think of problems today. Not necessarily always as this is the right way to do it, but just being aware of those is really good. I'm a big fan of being the idiot in the room, and I'm a big fan of approaching a problem knowing nothing. So take telecommunications, for example, and voice in particular. When we started in this space, we knew nothing. You could have parachuted a CEO in from a big telco that had done it for 30 years, but what's he going to do? He's going to recreate all of the problems that exist in that bigger broken business. Whereas somebody coming in being completely clueless, or somebody, in my case, somebody who had been here and being completely clueless, actually solves the problem and does things in a completely different way to the rest of the industry. And that's quite powerful. The other side of that is coming from a different industry or having exposure to a different industry enables you to see things from a different light. You're able to peek around the corner, as it were. So I love at the moment I have some non-executive roles. I've also done other things outside of Simwood. So I did mountain rescue for 15 15 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's a voluntary, activity that I loved for innumerate reasons. But most of my leadership learning and observation comes from that, being immersed in a group of people that would never even speak to each other on the street normally because they're from such different walks of life, and seeing how a team can function and be ultra performant is really, really useful. And similarly in the non-exec roles, seeing how other industries do things, and indeed bringing my experience from a completely different industry to theirs, I find is really, really useful. So I do try my best to stay ignorant, and certainly my partner would say I'm very successful at it.
Were you born a leader or were you made into a leader?
I was born disruptive, I think, although it took me a while to discover it, to discover my voice, if you like. I was born entrepreneurial, definitely. I wouldn't say I was a leader, no, early on. I think that developed as I grew confidence. I wasn't a confident child. I might have been precocious and all of those things, but I wasn't I wasn't the hard kid in the classroom, put it that way. But then again, I was the child that spanned all social groups, in the classroom, and could take the mick out of anybody in the school, from the biggest kid to the littlest kid. So, maybe there were signs there. I don't know.
People, when they talk to being an entrepreneur, when they start their journey, networking plays a massive role. Was that the case in your particular situation? Did you have a network to support you that you could lean into, or was it all on your own merit?
I didn't actually, but when we started ESMS, or Simwood in its early days, the product was called ESMS. I did it by way of a mailing list, and it was I ran it very much like the open source projects run now. So we had a community globally. There were people within that community that wanted to get more involved. Somebody would have a product idea, it would be expressed on the mailing list, it would make its way into the service. And there were some people on that I got close to, and there was one that actually became an early mentor, and he was quite a senior guy in the mobile industry. And one of his early bits of advice to me was build your network. That was what he thought I needed to do. And it was interesting because when I first met him, he had a wager on with somebody that I actually existed, because I was sort of hiding almost behind this mailing list. And it was in the times before, podcasts and YouTube and
yeah, we remember those times, don't we?
That they had all sorts of theories about, why I couldn't leave the house and whether I really existed. Now, I must admit, I didn't take his advice as fully as, looking back, I probably should. Part of that was logistics. Part of that was imposter syndrome. Part of that was resources. There's a peculiar irony to life, really, in that now I can fly to the other side of the world first class, and it's a rounding error in the accounts. Whereas back then, if I wanted to go to London for a meeting, it was a material event in the annual accounts. So. Yet the flip side of that is then I had all the time in the world and no responsibilities, whereas now I have a family, kids, one of whom requires 24/7 care. So me going somewhere is actually quite a disruptive thing for the family. So now I love being on stage. I love sharing what I know. I love meeting new people. My network now is obviously quite large, but now I'm constrained in feeding it, whereas back then when I didn't have one, I could have done.
So in terms of networking, is it more important at the start, or more important as you've got yourself grounded and set up, or is it no difference? It's equally important or unimportant?
I think there's different paths. So my approach has always been build it and they'll come, and the right people will find you if you're doing something good and you're doing something disruptive. However, my weakness throughout my career, and indeed in this business today, is sales. So I think if you've got if you've got a slidey scale, between substance and revenue, you pick where you are on that line. We've always been very much to the substance end of things. So customers, when they discover us, love us, and they're customers for life, I like to think. But we don't have the what in other cases might be more shallow, lucrative relationships at the at the other end. You could focus on putting yourself out there and winning business when you don't actually have much to service those customers with, or you could do it the way I prefer to do it, which is to build something substantial and hope they'll come. And to be honest, my passion's always been on the technology end of things. I like business, I like money, but I view that as the scoreboard, not the game. The game is the technology for me, whereas others are very much, it's all about the money and everything else is just, people in the basement making things happen, which I've, never liked.
I love a good segue. And since you mentioned technology, I thought it's probably the nicest point to slip this in. So if we look at technology, what kind of tech trends are currently catching your attention within the industry? And what do you think the driving factors are behind their significance?
Well, I mean, within the industry, within my industry, there's a few things that perhaps I'll come back to. But within the wider world, I think the obvious answer to that is AI. But everybody else has given you that answer. I expect the big driver for me at the moment, and what's quite interesting. Was two things really. One is decentralization. I think we're on a massive. We've passed peak centralization, shall we say? I don't want to use I'm going to have to the word blockchain, because I think that's been so overused along with 5G. It diminishes it. But let's use that as a proxy for decentralization. I think there's huge things to come in decentralization, and that permeates everything from the way people work and the gig economy rather than the job for life, through to the way technology actually works, where rather than having a centralized bank, you have a blockchain and a web browser. So I think there's a lot of hype in that space. There's a lot more to come over the coming months. I can take or leave Web3. I see the potential, but it's not worth the hype. But I think decentralization as a meta, there's massive change to come there, and it's really quite exciting. The thing I've found over the years is the technology, when it is first introduced, is never where it really makes a difference. So for example, within telecoms, for years we heard about WebRTC. And you can make phone calls in a browser. Yeah, great. So what? Whereas actually now, this product that we're using here will be WebRTC under the hood. Back then people used to demo what they developed by building a phone in a browser and making a phone call to their to their mobile. Actually, the real disruption of that technology is post phone, and things that the people that create it don't imagine. And there's some exciting things to come there, both from existing technologies like, say, WebRTC, decentralization, and the other one that I quite like, although have very little to do with, is sort of the no code movement. Now, the way you can, for example, not be a coder but create an algorithm effectively visually within a browser by joining things together. Now, again, that is viewed as a way of, I don't know, making your lights come on when you press the doorbell, that type of thing, but has massive power beyond that. You can almost imagine any kind of business with any kind of interface in any kind of department that uses that sort of technology to bring what was previously done by the devs to the fore. So Alice in the marketing department can create can create a flow that when somebody clicks on this, they get this email, and then a week later this happens, and you update HubSpot on the back end without requiring somebody more technical to do that. And again, it tends to live in a technical space at the moment, but I can see it, having massive disruption across every space really.
You've been brimming with positivity there, so maybe I can restrain it. So
don't ask me about politics.
Let's switch it a little bit. Are there any things that are concerning you, or things that you don't feel good about coming up on the horizon?
Politics. There's. I don't want to talk about the US election, but let's just say, without revealing too much, that I'm slightly more hopeful after that. But I think I'm here in the UK, as you might tell, and I think it's really, really sad and really, really distressing where the world is, particularly close to home for me. There's a lot of unsolved challenges. I'm not convinced those in positions of leadership, shall we say, are remotely equipped or remotely intent to solve them. And as a dad of 3 daughters, I'm quite worried what the world they're growing up into looks like. There's obvious challenges that are unaddressed. To use AI again, the pace of development there and the lack of control of it is kind of concerning. The opposite at the opposite end of things, and something actually that may help address, is the population cliff edge, coming down the line. And this was a concept that was only introduced to me a few months ago, because I've grown up in a country being told every day that there's too many of us, and the world can't feed all of these 7 billion people. And actually, it was presented to me the other week how the largest country on earth has had a one-child policy. Fertility rates in the West are falling, and actually, you look ahead, and with the exception of perhaps India, where a quarter of the population are under 25, I think, the West is aging and dying. China, the population is plummeting, and you have to ask the question: who's going to do the work in the future? Now, sadly, the answer to that may be AI, with all of us sitting at home on universal basic income, but that isn't necessarily a world that somebody like me welcomes or looks forward to. I don't have a positive vision for the future, really, sadly, which is the first time, I think, in my life or my career. Technology, for me, has always been the beacon. There's always been something good to look forward to that's going to make such a positive difference in the world. And I can see some positives coming, particularly for those of a lazy bent, having a robot, emptying your dishwasher and stuff like that might be appealing. But there's a huge amount of disruption to come. And if I look ahead, I mentioned I'm hugely into finance and money and markets, etc. If I look ahead, in both the economy, financial markets, and the world of work, I don't know what things look like after 2030. I can look to that point and things are disruptive, but they bear a resemblance to the past. I don't know what they look like after 2030. My eldest daughter's 11. She's into coding. She's into all the things you might expect her to be, and being my daughter. Is that where she's going to find a career? Probably not. Actually, I think the careers of the future are things that we might dismiss today, like pub singers. Things that you can't replace with a robot and an algorithm, where humanity can be faked, but it can never be replicated. You can always tell if you're speaking to a real human being or something AI. And I think as humans have less and less to do, we're going to crave more and more humanity. Obviously, the establishment is trying to separate us and segregate us and make people, destroy communities and family and all of that kind of thing. But I like to think that the human spirit will rebel against that and ultimately will crave humanity. And that's where I see the careers of the future, because I don't see technology is great. Being a coder is great for me, for my generation, and people in work now. In 20 years' time, you're going to be controlling AI. You're going to be the orchestrator of the algorithm. Probably not.
So you don't envisage.
Sorry.
Are you kind of like prophesizing a Terminator 2-esque future? Is that what you're saying?
It's funny how many how many films I watched as a childhood, and you're alluding to the same, where you create effectively a singularity of such intelligence that it concludes that the only way to save humanity is to get rid of humans. I think there's the obvious question: what are we for in that world, and how do things work? And this is what I say. I can't see what that looks like after about 2030. It's very easy to go down the conspiratorial route, and quite frankly, there's a ton of evidence to support that any way you look. But there's equally, you would hope, well-intentioned governments trying to deal with things like the population cliff edge, and how you feed and look after an aged population that has no work. They're two sides of the same coin, really. But I do think if Elon's been ringing the bell for ages on AI and the uncontrolled development of it, and I mean we're going back 8-10 years, where I spoke to a conference of techies in the US, just imploring them to care more about privacy. And that was pretty good, because I did I was talking to them about privacy and collection of their data, whilst I'd socially engineered some of them the night before and did a mock assassination based on identifying them in the audience from their unique digital signature. But the rise of social media and the harvesting of personal data has put us in a position where personal sovereignty isn't really a thing anymore for somebody that's been online, and that's sad and worrying. And as somebody that others would look to as somebody in business, I'm pretty ashamed of that. Not that my company has ever participated in anything like that. We've always railed against it. But the big money in the world at the moment is made from harvesting other people's data, however you skin it, and joining that together. You put that together with, something with a 10,000 IQ and all of the knowledge that there's ever been. That's quite a scary world.
And I could talk to you about this all day, Simon, but for the interest of time, forgive me. Switching on to something a little bit more optimistic, hopefully. Have you got any primary focal points or ongoing projects or endeavours that you'd like to share with us about what's coming up in the future for your company?
For Simwood, absolutely. So we're in a mature industry, so we say. We've always been on the cutting edge of it, but although Gartner and all of the industry forecasts suggest things are going to continue growing, the reality is that in 100 years' time, I don't see people paying for phone calls, and that's what our entire industry is based on. So as a 28-year-old business that's looking to the next 28 rather than the next two or three as most people would, I need to navigate us to a post-telecom world, if you like. And the reality for me is that whilst the phone, as we currently see it, will disappear, voice will become a feature. You'll speak to your bank through your banking app. You won't necessarily make a phone call to them. We'll have applications such as this that previously would have been conference calls. Well, whilst that will disappear, voice will live on. Voice will live on forever. So trying to navigate us to a place where we're providing the picks and shovels in the gold rushes of the future within that space. And for us, that takes us back to our roots around convergence and integration. So we're we're an API first business. We effectively give people an API to telecoms. So you can create a telco just using our API on the back end. Fundamentally, we have a concept called the potato, which usually captures people's imagination, but it's a metaphor really for the way our network is completely different to every other telcos on the planet, and how we can wrap our core network in multiple service layers, AI being one of them, transcription, call recording, translation, all of that good stuff, all API controlled and all across multiple transports, from, for example, Microsoft Teams through to the traditional phone network, through to SIP, through to WebRTC. So that's our focus at the moment, and that's quite interesting because there's a kind of cannibalistic element to it, in the sense that we're the only phone company or carrier on the planet that is willing to forego carrier revenues. And so what we're essentially doing is we're happy to not have today's revenue in order to have tomorrow's market share. And give you an example of that. So there's a concept in our space called BYOC, bring your own carrier. So if you have a service, I don't know, like a ticketing system, and you want to plug phone calls into it, you can use your own carrier. Makes sense in that space. We've brought bring your own carrier to the carrier. So we're enabling our customers to use our competitors to connect into the potato. Now, obviously, we'd much sooner they spend the money with us rather than spending money with our competitor. But the way I view it is we're adding the value to them. We're capturing their loyalty, and they just happen to be spending money today with our competitor. Tomorrow that money won't exist, but they'll hopefully still be our customer. That's the theory and the logic, and that's quite an interesting journey. It gets me back to the coalface in terms of doing cool stuff, which for a period in our history I've missed, and hopefully puts us in a place where we can navigate the future.
That's incredibly interesting and forward thinking. And just in the constraints of time, any advice for people who maybe are early entrepreneurs or are thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, looking at your life story? What kind of advice would you give to those people?
I think there's two pieces of contradictory advice. The one is, try and spend some time in the real world first to learn about the workplace, learn about businesses, just learn basic stuff. You can do an MBA, or you can spend 30 years in corporate life to learn similar things, or you can go out on your own and learn it as you go along. But having a few years in the real world before going into business, I think is a nice halfway. And then I said it was contradictory. The flip side to that, I would say, is just get on and do it, because I mentioned the ironies earlier of when you've got loads of time, you haven't got any money. When you have got the money, you've got family commitments. And when I speak at schools and otherwise to young people, I make the point that you've never got less to lose than today. In a few months' time, a few years' time, you might have a wife, then you might have a child, then you've got a mortgage to pay. All of those things affect your attitude to risk, your tolerance for risk, and your ability to just go, kind of balls to the wall and get on with it. And if you're going to lose everything, as I have along the way, then it's better to do that when there's less collateral damage, and getting that education in a safe space, if you like.
Lovely. That's great advice. Simon, I just want to thank you again so much for taking time to speak with me today. We really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. That was Simon Woodhead, a founder and group CEO at Simwood Group PLC.